The Terminal Attack update and its consequences have been a disaster for the finals. They have greatly increased the life expectancy of lights who squander it by being extra egoistical. They cultivated destabilized mindsets, have made the game unfulfilling, have subjected heavy mains to constant indignities, have led to widespread collective psychological suffering, and have inflicted severe damage on the natural balance of the game. The continued buffing of lights will worsen the situation. It will certainly subject the finals to greater indignities and deal irreparable damage on the game's balance. It will probably lead to worse matchmaking and psychological suffering, and it may lead to increased quitting, even to high-ranked levels of play. If none of that made sense to you, then you probably are not aware of the crimes committed by certain company to one of the best games to ever exist, to then disregard it as nothing but business as usual. The Finals has been my favorite game of all time ever since I played it for the first time in open beta. The striking visual identity, the music, the gameplay experience were something that no other game was able to replicate. I was in the Discord chat spamming "Is this the finals?" during the Game Awards if there was any remote sign of the color red. And as soon as the game became open to public, it was the moment when I became hooked. I knew that I had something on hands that I might never be able to find in such a long time. It was, at the time, my dream game. People may have their own way to describe their favorite game, but to me and many other people, when we talk about a dream game, it means that if we were to make a beta game, then it would have been just like this one, or would have a lot of features that the game in question has. For example, a lot of people tend to call Minecraft their dream game, despite later understanding the crooked foundation it is based upon, but respecting it for what laid down so others could take it in the better or unique direction. The Finals had everything for me: a distinct visual identity and general presentation, teams that are just enough size to still give individual players enough agency and impact but still play as a team, objective-oriented game instead of purely based on guilds, 3 builds, meaning 3 distinct ways of playing the game that diversified into subclasses, a functioning ranked system that despite being hard to climb to the top feels rewarding per match, dynamic gameplay elements that seamlessly are deeply embedded within the game and make every match unique without making it feel like it's based on luck, and the fact that even my low to mid-range PC could play it on low settings, but still retain a lot of the clarity and its aesthetics. All of these things made this game perfect during what many consider the golden age of the finals. Although quite short-lived, after not only balancing decisions that impacted gameplay, but the decisions caused by the direction of the game was looking forward to. Even during the time the game had one of its lowest player counts, I was still there, because I liked the radical direction of the game was taking on with new modes and experimentation with what felt like big changes, even if they were reserved for short events in between matches. I felt that despite the game already having some years to define itself, and after 3 sessions of playtesting previous to launch, it still wanted to do great changes in between seasons. But let's slow down a little bit and cut out the doomer crap. How was the finals in the beginning, and how is it now, and where is it going to? On release, the finals was the most refreshing experience you could have in the market. A physics playground natively embedded within a PvP first-person shooter environment that provided the same hype for Battlefield gameplay. Given a good part of the founders of Embark were part of veteran staff of Battlefield developers. Everyone at the time was talking about this game having great potential to overcome industry giants and even become one, considering it was also crossplay with consoles and PC. Despite its complexity of gameplay and multiple things to manage at the same time, it was certainly enjoyable on consoles. Over time, despite wanting to take itself seriously like an esport, the updates for the game and the balancing were coming really slowly. Game seasons changed every 90 days. 90 days or 3 months, which compared to a lot of other games with content updates coming in regularly each month, it would be like comparing a turtle against a hare. And this is not the kind of lesson that the turtle and the hare teaches us. On release, everyone was still discovering how the general game worked out. The objective was simple to understand and accomplish, yet the many ways to achieve that in the dynamic environment are part of what made this game have a learning curve that also demanded you to know a lot of game interactions. Although one of the major design flaws surfaced early, within the first month. Medium, one of the 3 available builds, was at the time the strongest one to pick. Not because he had high damage or was the most versatile to play, of course not, but he had access to the 2 most powerful gadgets in the game. Defibrillator to instantly revive any teammate of yours, and Recon Senses, which were just wall hacks on command. And this is no exaggeration. When you can see where people are coming from, you don't need game sense or anything within your brain to help you make more elaborated decisions. If you can catch your opponent first before he catches you, then you already have an advantage over the enemy. So this not only allowed hyper-aggressive dive combos to instantly terminate loners, but also make it harder to pick off the Recon team one by one. The finals allows teams to stack 3 of the same build, and then you can imagine what the game was mostly dominated by during the first season of the game. It didn't really matter if you were able to pick one of them if they were able to almost instantly revive each other, so in extreme cases it felt like a 9v3. Because the cooldown was long enough so that if you managed to stall out the fight, you could get 2 instant revives. So to counter the dive meta, you need your own dive meta in order to hit them hard and quick in an instant duel, so they had no time to revive their teammates. A lot of people were still learning this game at the time, and part of the learning came with understanding the physics and interactions this game allows. The arena has props of funky colors, some of which can have mines and explosives attached to them and also be thrown. This is also what made some people discover what could be considered the most fun yet overpowered interaction in the whole game: the nuke. With Heavy, we want to grab an explosive barrel so it can also travel faster, further, and explode on impact, put 2 C4s on it, and you have the power of the sun within your hand. If you barely miss your opponent while it is still in the air, you could also activate the C4 remotely, and that was capable of insta-killing a Heavy. There was no realistic way to counter this other than shooting at the barrel before it can be thrown, or even in extreme cases, counter fire with fire, by making an explosion close to the barrel so it can either activate the explosives and kill the enemy in the process, or blow the carryable so that the C4 just falls down. So it had a way to be countered, but it was really annoying to deal with because of the surprise element. If you turned around and you see the big guy with its big red nuke on hand, you knew it was going down. So Medium and Heavy were broken in their own ways, but did Light have anything at this point to fight back? Not really, unless you consider Cloak or Stun Gun overpowered. Of course, get better at the game! By this time, Light was considered the weakest build available. Yes, it had technically the fastest movement and the highest damage output per weapon, but people were still trying to get the hang of it, and it was hard, particularly with everyone else having their own broken toys and the most counterplay for Light. Everyone had access to motion sensors, so spotting a Light passing through a door wasn't really a problem, but also with mines you could technically do this and potentially kill them without even fighting. Of course, put strategic thinking over raw dueling. But was Season 1 the greatest problem of the finals? Of course not. The balance soon started getting adjusted, first with many tweaks to what was the OP stuff to make it a bit less viable, but the big nerfs for mediums, Reconsensus, Defibrillator, and nukes didn't come until Season 2, which also brought new toys for everyone along with a new map. So with Reconsensus being just removed for being hard to balance and Defib being less effective, medium stacking was no longer the most viable option, but yet still one. So people were experimenting more with other stacking, like Light and Heavy stacking. Supposing both Light and Heavy had an equal level of skill, Heavy was more likely to win Light on duels, and in pure gadget utility. Mostly because of the HP difference and the fact that Heavy, still to this day, has a lot of utility that is particularly good for a being as fragile as Light. RPG used to deal 150 damage, C4 dealt even more damage, Charge and Slam dealt a lot of damage, and with access to fire and explosive mines you were almost sure to get an easy kill if the Light player wasn't careful. So of course, early on the rivalry within Light and Heavy players arose, generally with the complaints that one tends to win more over the other for having one broken aspect about it, or of course, skill issue. Season 2 was arguably the best time to play the finals. A lot of the annoying shit was sent to the Shadow Realm, but there was still a lot of space to experiment with. The new toys and old strats that could have gone unseen and underrated if it wasn't for the balance changes. But starting this point forward is where we also see the game stagnate, flatline, and slowly start losing players. A lot of things felt balanced, and despite having new weapons and gadgets for all builds, there was a great sense for discovery and mastery within everything that was still yet to be unveiled. But one of the main parasites that infest this game started showing its symptoms. It's not like this is exclusive to the finals, no sir, this happens within any game that can be considered competitive enough. Starting this time, and in the seasons that were coming after, as private matches were introduced, the competitive scene for this game flourished, as community-managed organizations formed around part of the community that was just very competitive about the game. And this is not the bad part about this, but rather the way that a great majority of the people think about games, and their competitive side means that they either don't understand what healthy game balance is, or they just think you are complaining about the most nothing thing. That you should praise Embark for at least doing bug fixing and doing any balance changes at all, and that you are skill issue. In other words, get better. In other words, fuck you, filthy casual. The community seems to be divided in one of three kinds. The first kind, which is the great majority of the average player base, is an enjoyer of shooting games, and plays the game casually, be it from time to time or as their main game, and doesn't even dare to touch any of the competitive modes. The second kind of player, which makes a smaller percent but probably the most vocal one, is the competitive player. The meta slave that plays nothing but ranked and treats it as casual, and will complain about anything that it barely counters it in the hope that Embark actually complies and nerfs it. And the third kind, my kind, is the even smaller minority, are the people that play gimmicks or really like to use guns and playstyle that people tend to dismiss as a fun one-time thing or not capable of reaching high-level exposure. But they still break their ass and queue competitive after competitive game, trying to make those meta slaves hard swallow their own words and force them to reconsider the other angle of what makes the finals so fun and unique. If you're a top competitive player and you tell me that there are actually people at the very top or in tournaments that are racking win after win using something that has not been considered meta since Season 3, you're spitting bullshit out of your dirty mouth and editing it badly to your ass. A lot of early reviews of the game all the way back to Season 1 and early Season 2 reflect some of the main complaints people had early on. The perception of balancing and how one player with an uncommon strategy can usually outclass 3 unprepared people. This is not really fault of the game, but partly the player for not having enough preparation about how to counter the specific playstyle, or as a lot of these so-called top players will tell you, is just to shoot them before they can get to you, as if they didn't do the same thing every game. In theory, it works, but we're going to talk about that later. There is a great disconnect in how game plays between skilled players at the very top versus average games. In the average casual 3v3v3 games, you tend to see a mix of meta with a mix of people just having fun and fucking around, usually with what seems like random loadouts sometimes. But at the top, you almost never see any difference between these teams. Everyone almost seems replaceable, and you can barely tell what makes one player stand out from the other. The people at the top know that they are playing the most optimal loadout and will tell you very proudly that if you deviate even just a little bit, you're throwing the game, despite also complaining that the off-meta can easily kill them. This is the parasite I'm referring to. There is some point in any competitive game where a set of similar-minded individuals within the top make up bullshit and tell you that the meta is only to stay within this set of rules. And if you do anything different than that, then I will complain to the developer and have it nerfed to the ground. And because the developers trust that the top players are the ones most wise about the game, they will follow their advice. This is a poisonous mindset that has trapped a lot of players into this game and has even infected casual players. People that will treat casual as this super sweaty game where the ultimate goal is to win, grind the shit out of the progression system and call themselves good at the game, but when you send them into an actual ranked match, they are dog shit. The people that proudly display Emerald in their profiles or weapon skins are some of these people, and they are also contributing to the problem for following the meta and having such an individual thinking without actually putting thought into what would help the team or what would actually counter the enemy. Everyone has complained since the beginning that maybe X or Y weapon shouldn't be as OP, maybe A or B gadget should be more powerful, or that even C or D are underrated, just as the game is in the general gaming landscape. The game is not underrated. It is known for having little to no marketing to new public, and the videos its YouTube channel posts are usually an echo chamber to the same player that tends to play the game daily and keep praising it as an underrated game. I know that because I've been on that place. My whole channel and my chat history in the Discord server shows that. But this is the reason why I make this video and display it on public, despite talking somewhat negatively and destructively about the community, the developers, and the game itself. The balance of the game is what made it stagnate, not the lack of content. The fact that the game has depth to it is what makes it appealing, not what makes it hard for new players to get into. We can take this argument into any remotely competitive game, let's say Counter-Strike. The possibilities of strategy lie within knowing basic strategy, good shooting mechanics, and game sense along with basic team coordination. Even in teams that have no voice chat can clearly keep game sense as long as they are aware of the comms that the game automates and the fact that the game lets you always have an eye on the map. So even without knowing the exact locations of the enemy, you can have a good idea of where they might be. Then, after learning all of the possible angles, all of the cheeky spots, and all of the cross-map smokes and lineups, the game's basically sold. Even back since Global Offensive, Molotovs were the new addition, a quite controversial one, enough to make people stay in Source or 1.6. But as the big money and great majority of people moved to the flashiest newer version of the game they loved, then people stopped caring and just used it as regular utility, to then be later developed deeply as the other ones also were. The game didn't precisely stagnate, but rather the balance changes were few and separate, but were influential enough to over time actually change the game at the top level. SG meta, suiciding instead of fighting the enemy, stacking up frags in one spot, cross-map decoys that the enemy will mistake for a smoke, but then they block the decoy, but then they shoot the real smoke. And there you see the metagame within the metagame, that revolves mostly around utility more than the gunplay. Contrary to the finals, where you can tune into streams of people at the top and they can be spending more time training in Kovacs than actually playing the game. And even when they do play the game, they barely call out anything. Be it in solo or with a team on Discord, they are so sure that everyone knows the role they lock into based on the build alone. So they think there is no real need to communicate other than just be aware of the main cues like someone taking damage or the cash out being stolen. And they are very sure that the bad matchmaking of the game will match them against people that are not even half as good as them. So you see reflected that they still treat the game as a casual thing and don't really care about it, despite the other thing actually trying their hardest. And the worst part is that even if you go from top competitive streamer to another, there is not much change or difference other than the personality or the class they are playing. The same argument can be made with Counter-Strike, but a lot of what actually makes teams and single players different are their clear strengths, their innovations, and the personality behind them. Counter-Strike is not complex, the game is quite simple and has a lot of rules in place with economy, utility, and mirror dueling, but these rules were made so deep by the players that this depth added to the simple rules are what can keep a game interesting despite being known and studied for decades at this point. The same point could be made about chess. No new balance changes is en passant, yet it got particularly bigger during COVID. People that also look for new content of chess can find it in its variations. Something like Random Fisher has great potential for being the best variation. The game appears too deep, or even for the youngest of players it can appear too simple and boring, yet this doesn't stop even tabletop games like Monopoly from having a competitive scene purely based on how deep the game can be. Even in League of Legends, balance changes do minor balancing merely to tone down dominant strategies or particular legends that probably allow spotlights to others. Trend setting and moderating trends is what balance changes are for. The game is inherently complex and has a lot of moving parts, and the game does do a bad job at teaching the game, plus the fact that there are more than 100 different characters with 5 abilities is just too much to remember. But the funny thing about games like League is that in the end you only have to learn about how the game is designed, to then play around it and follow the general loop of the game. Push your lane, collect money, upgrade, gang up on enemies to deny them from getting money, repeat. Games like League have this fake infinite replayability trap that the finals copies in a smart way. Nothing stops it from playing Teemo as a tank, as an attack damage carry, or as a support, but your team will tell you that you're throwing for not playing optimally and then you're further discouraged from doing anything different. League does become less scary to play and experiment with once you understand how it works, but the breed of players that are willing to play absolutely everything in every single possible way might be 0 to none. Just as it is with a game with a lot of choices that you can easily run into decision paralysis. Stick with whatever Mr. Top Player says is good and not question it. League is inherently complex and has a lot of depth, yet that doesn't stop people from getting better or wanting to get into it. Now back to the finals. The finals didn't have a consistent way of balancing thing, and if it did, it took until recently to at least be very transparent about it, and this is what made playing the game stagnate, in my eyes and many others. Usually, in your way, you want to make balance changes in order to make things balanced, like in chess. If a pawn meets another pawn head-to-head, then they draw. But in a badly balanced game, even if both players dueling have the exact same skill level, one side is more likely to come out victorious purely because the balance over the gadgets or weapons. In the finals, you have these 3 builds. Light is the fastest and most fragile, but is able to output a lot of damage. Heavy is the opposite, being slow, and many people just call it a tank. But its kit lies mostly on close combat and defensive options. Medium is in theory the best of both worlds, with enough utility and enough firepower to contest either of them all. Do you remember how I said in the beginning Light was seen as the weakest build? In this day and age, people dare to play Light stacks or even 2L and Heavy and have a good chance to win merely by dueling and debating attention to the tank to have the Lights gun the enemy down. Throw everything I said about balance out of the window and just give them all a weapon that kills you in the blink of an eye. Strategy? I haven't heard of that. All I know is how to duel and camp the enemies from the most annoying spot in the map. In theory, the fact that they are fragile should make them a glass cannon. But as it is often in reality, this makes them far more of a threat than they should be, even with a smaller hitbox. Let's say that you're heavy and there is a light behind you, but you don't know this yet. So the light starts shooting at you, the natural response would be to turn around, identify your threat, and instantly shoot back. In these cases of Light being the aggressor, the time you take to react back is basically time you might spend actually aim training and working on reaction time. But the problem with Light is that his weapons are so overtuned that this gives the wrong idea to a lot of people to think that Light should be a frontliner in the same way a medium or a heavy can do. A lot of Lights are so full of shit in their brain, insane in the membrane, and fucked to their core that they will die first hand in the team fight trying to 1v3 and then blame you for not being able to come back from that situation. Light used to be the least picked and the weakest early on the game's life, but as the hardcore players took better grip at it and Game-Labs nerds learned how to make better use of it with movement, it made playing anything else almost impossible. This, plus the fact that Light has not only gotten buff after buff, while the other main counter to it like Heavy has only gotten weaker and weaker. Like, what's the use on trying to hit a small fly on your screen when you are 10 times bigger on his screen and he can kill you in one hit anyways? But I hear you say, oh, if they are dominating open spaces, then how about you flank them and force a close quarter fight? That is a great idea, if it weren't for the fact that in some maps that is not even a possibility. Some people have over-optimized the game to abuse dark tech that even I didn't know that was possible in order to manipulate all of their chances in their favor. Number 1. Get to a high point and snipe the shell of anyone that is trying to get close, usually outranging them and winning the game without even actually being in danger. This turns the game into an aim trainer more than a natural shooter. Number 2. Manipulate the spawn points and spawn timers in order to make it harder for the enemy to regroup or even to get to the point on time. Number 3. Despite having access to lethal equipment for gadgets and specs, you can totally ignore those and use only your weapon and focus your loadout on compensating for defense. Number 4. Now that your loadout and your team focuses on defense and only have their weapons to deal damage, let's either outsnipe them or dive into them. And number 5. Repeat that loop. I'm not kidding, once people figured out that you could manipulate spawn points and make enemies lose time by walking or stalling their own deaths, you technically have more control over how they act as a whole. For this reason is that teams focused on having a lot of defensive and utility options over lethal, yet save little bit for a dive for those dire situations where you sometimes have to lock in for the objective and half ignore the enemy just to get a last second steal. I gotta admit that as much as I can enjoy shooter games, the final can hit you with a lot of surprises, yet the most unpleasant one is how little they are at the more you climb in rank. Even casual can be more interesting for the sake of variety. The finals prides itself on being too diverse with melee weapons, unique gadgets, specializations, a whole different cast of projectile weapons for each build, and yet the people at the top only play the same thing they've been playing for the last 5 seasons. The worst part about this is that as seasons have progressed, the new weapons and gadgets have not really made an impact other than flashy YouTube thumbnails, and that's it. It's not about the fact that very little weapons actually are different than the ones that came out before it, but rather the fact that people are so full of placebo. In the ideal world that is the finals, you never have to get close to your opponent. You just have to click on this pixel in the middle of your screen and hope that you hit your shots. If you can't aim or you can't close distances, then you're at a severe disadvantage. And it's not even like the dedicated long-range weapons are the problem. The mid-range weapons have such a high range, and even with fall of damage you can still get beam passing their effective distance. I have always been vocal about a major rework to a lot of the mid to long range weapons for being too effective at any range. Take for example the sniper rifle SR-84 for Light. It has the longest range and it is the most effective at technically any range, but it is a projectile weapon and you have to lead it the further you are from your target. Despite that, a lot of people force it into a close range, because one body shot plus a quick melee can take care of lights. 2 body shots or a headshot melee can take care of mediums. And 2 headshots can just delete a heavy, or 3 body shots and a melee. I cannot believe that I'm going to say this, but even games like Call of Duty did this better. They understand that snipers are high power weapons, so to make them easier to counter at closer ranges, they made the hipfire spread very high and have a longer time to get from hipfire to aim down sights, to simulate how hard it can be to get into position. Even add a mechanic like holding your breath to make yourself more accurate only for a moment before dying for being short of breath. The finals, though, makes the sniper really forgiving to consistently hipfire at close quarters and have a really short pause between shots, almost dismissing entirely what should make a sniper more effective at far but less effective at close. I am not the first one to discuss how bad the game can feel as someone that enjoys playing the most unconventional and unique playstyle to ever exist. I am not trying to say that this is a loud cry for Embark to change in favor of more variety and radical experimentation rather than what this respec order bullshit is, which just shows that Embark thinks that it's about movement speed and giving more handouts to lights and more handicaps to heavy. then this will make the game feel more fair, when they are treating the game that is capable of deep and complex strategy as if it was quick aim duel. People don't believe the fact that Light has been getting stronger and Heavy has been getting weaker. The update tendencies and the fact that they once admitted that Light is the most picked class while Heavy is the least picked one tells the generally casual player base that they don't need to get better at the game. They just have to wait for their favorite weapon to be the month's meta. And the balance changes they made have sometimes been horrible. Apparently they do base their changes particularly on pick rates, but sometimes the changes they make are merely buffs for apparently no reason or nerfs for apparently no reason. Every gimmick weapon and non-meta weapon has suffered changes that made it somewhat enjoyable to play them, but also have made them harder to play when everyone else is using something far more optimal. Let's take as an example melee weapons. The intent of melee is to punish players for allowing the enemy to get too close. Light has its movement and cloak to get closer, Heavy has to rely on destruction and extra mobility to close distances, and Medium has to walk diagonally. I'm okay with something like Riot Shield existing, but holy shit, no matter what you're playing, you know that it is horrible to play against. And it is because of how the shield was overcooked, or more like undercooked. The special ability of the Riot Shield is that you can put it up to your face and block bullets, projectiles, direct explosive, and even melee hits. As long as you have the shield up, you will also walk slower than usual in theory. This should work, but there are small places where you're exposed, like anywhere but the front and your feet. But you can just not do that and have a hitbox that seems to not register any damage because of how disjointed the visual of the shield is from your character. So people figured out that you can just run diagonally to your victim and it will have the same effect, if not better result. Even when too close, melee hits can be blocked and bullets seem to just not hit clearly because fuck you. This recently got fixed, but I know I see it less because in recent updates we also got an even bigger fuck you to any melee enjoyers. So this was marked off as a bug, but this being said, many people knew this was an intentional shadow change that was probably coming sooner or later. What happened is that melees apparently got their hit speed nerfed because what seemed to happen is that the animation and input to attack buffered, so you saw the next hit incoming before the whole animation finished. But now that buffer was no more and you had to go through the whole animation before you can start swinging again, and this was a death sentence to melee players. And not only that, but you were not able to cancel swings or charges by switching to gadgets or specs or even by quick melee. What the fuck were they thinking? They are actively trying to remove tech from the game. I can respect the fact that people found tech that was not originally intended, but sometimes it goes too far, like with this melee change, or even something as small as cancelling an animation during reload to start shooting a little bit faster. This, funnily enough, they have been dealing with since Season 1 with almost every single weapon. Part of their solution to this problem was to do direct changes to how the buffer of reload and shooting works on specific weapons. They admitted this was a technical problem with the animation system as well, and even in System 1 you were able to do a quick melee, do a fast switch, and then do a quick melee again to create the highest damage in the game purely by abusing this animation cancelling mechanic. Again, in situations like this where it is purely overpowered, I'm okay with it being patched out. But as time has went on, the disconnect between what the competitive mindset has cultivated has affected the perception of how the game should be played and enjoyed at a deep level. Every build has a choice of 12 weapons, yet we only see one of two choices at the top because people also don't like to experiment or they just want to ensure a positive track record with 0 losses. If people face something that they don't like, it will get nerfed because the vocal majority dictates that. Dagger, for example, is an interesting concept. It suffers from constantly having a faulty hit detection, and despite this being fixed, all the time it just got nerfed and made it harder for the user to actually play it. So people that are playing anything but the meta are having trouble actually enjoying the game, and this is partly what kills the single idea of actually having individuality and variety within the game. What's the point of being able to stack builds if one of each per team seems to be the optimal play? The developers were very happy to see that this was a mutual agreement within everyone to have this be the optimal composition, most purely for the two particular utilities each build has. The meta is a variation of this and doesn't strive far from it, again because people want to win. The Mind Parasite tells you that if you don't win, you're not having fun. What about the gimmick weapons like MGL-32? Inherently the hardest weapon to play and the most unique one that has ever graced any multiplayer shooter game. I love this weapon and I love playing a game where I can kinda care about winning, but I care most about learning how to get better with something this unique. I play off meta to get better, you play off meta to counterpick. We are not the same. People that play off meta do it for the sake of having fun and playing something unconventional that not many other games allow, like the melees. Remember Call of Duty Black Ops 3? The melee along with the new movement was really fun, but then after that the whole movement system was dumbed down and then removed because people didn't like it? I don't climb ranked using regular hit scans because that inherently makes the game too easy. I can just sit on top of a building and shoot down people trying to get close, and I can get out of gold any day that I actually want. But I keep locking into MGL32 instead because with an environment as dynamic as the finals, I have a total guarantee that as long as I use MGL32, no game will be exactly like any other I had before. I don't get heavy mains that praise the class for having a lot of destructive potential, yet play hyper defensive and only reserve explosive for stalling objectives. What about denying utility? What about strategic demolition for areas? What about the reliable way to counter goo without wasting fire? What about the reliable way to counter smoke even? If people just default into the meta, then they're stripped away from all critical and creative thinking, then I start to run into the same competition and the same people every single game. Am I the weird one for thinking that the game that prides itself on being so creative and strategic has isolated itself from what it praised? Am I the weird one for tracking balance meticulously and having to lecture people for purely gaslighting themselves thanks to the mind parasite? Am I in the wrong for thinking that balance direction of the game has favored a more classic shooter gameplay over a more creative driven one? Am I in the wrong for thinking that the meta becoming stale on the lack of marketing are what made the game flatline from the get-go? Is it even remotely wrong for me to complain about the game that I have deeply studied, analyzed, played and enjoyed for so long, and yet it seems that it always goes on the opposite direction I hoped it went? Other people have made these inconsistencies clear, have made their own testing, and even with that, misinformation can be spread easily. Developers were looking for a change in how the balance of the game is considered, but also a rework for every single one of the fun weapons are on the works. And by on the works, I mean threatened since a long time ago, but either they don't know how to do it, or would have to adapt the rest of the meta to make space for it. Weapons like MGL32 do not need to fit into standards to be forced into the meta. The fact that some weapons are unique are what make them a unique options to choose from. I have already made lots of suggestions on how to balance the game to allow for greater variety. To me, the recent dev stream and respec order are what make me make this video. I am genuinely in shock and in awe about how the game has been threatened, with a lot of content planned in advance, yet little to no impact from current additions into existing ones, other than the new tweaks making it harder for other things to actually have 0 to 100 matchups. But even still, with new specs and weapons, what even is the difference compared to what we already have in meta? People are gaslighting themselves about weapons based purely on what they think it's time to kill, when it is an inaccurate measure considering how variable it can be based on server lag, your own reaction time, your own aim, how well the enemy responds, and even hell, your own perception of time. Your ass will not be able to tell the difference of milliseconds and still say, oh, they did something to my favorite weapon, let me read the patch notes. People thought that the new crossbow was overpowered. It was not. If anything, the only benefit it had, it was a relatively low recoil and a silent option. A B9S for medium, basically. I am getting sick of this game for buffing all of the meta weapons all the time and just having basically a wheel within their office that tells them what to nerf or buff next by a 3%. A 3% that is not even really noticeable unless the change is really profound. Something that most of the times it isn't. I may be wrong for thinking that maybe the finals wants to have a competitive, mostly player base. Yet they might be in denial about the fact that most of the player base is casual. They can farm the shit out of cash out and team deathmatch, but would never dare to actually climb on ranked. They would just do their placement matches and they would happily stay there. And even if people wanted to climb, the balancing environment forces them to use only the meta, because that is what is the most effective, of course. And if your favorite weapon or style is just not the most effective, maybe because your teammates don't want to work with something that they're not familiar with, or they just refuse to actually coordinate, then bad luck. Play something else. And again, for people like me that actually enjoy the off-meta, it is such an uphill battle. Not because of MGL32 itself, but because even when people queue into ranked, they don't even open voice chat, and not even ping. They seem totally clueless about the game. What is the fucking deal to queue into a competitive game if people don't even take this as seriously as they should? I tried looking for a remotely serious team, but because I keep insisting in such a unique playstyle, if I don't fit in, well then, fuck me. I did not want to take this video into such a negative tangent, but I think it's now the perfect time to just, instead of making another video with a good light on the game, maybe I should put a highlight in what have been my gripes with it for so long, and put it to rest for some time. I am not going to play this game in quite some time, but my legacy and the impact I did within the smaller part of the community is there. And even if this video gets ignored, as every single one of my other videos did, I wouldn't care. Because if the general community also ignores the smaller creators of its space, that also reflects what the community thinks about outliers like me. I'm done for now.
Attack is back, and it looks like it's here to stay. Season 3 took us on an epic journey to feudal Japan with Kyoto 1568. We also changed the new ranked mode to Terminal.
Let's just stick to the good things we remember about Season 3, like the winch claw.